Hello, my name is Lillian Okiwe. Welcome to my channel. A few days ago, I shared with you guys 10 reasons why you should get locks. So if you like locks and you're kind of confused, trying to decide whether getting locks is actually the right decision for you, then I highly recommend that you go and watch that video, because I believe that you're going to find it so helpful. So let's say you've decided that you want locks, so you're willing to go through with the lock journey. The next step is to try to figure out what size of locks you want. Now this can be very confusing because there are so many different sizes of locks, and all sizes are beautiful, but not all sizes will be the best for you. So figuring out or deciding the right size of locks that you want to go for will actually help to make your lock journey much easier, so that you don't end up getting locks and then you end up realizing that like you don't like the size and you have to comb out your locks to start afresh. So nobody wants that. So in this video, I'm going to be helping you figure out the right size of locks for you. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, then please keep on watching. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be categorizing locks into various sizes. So the first size we're going to be talking about is the freeform locks. Freeform locks basically can be any size. If you don't know what freeform locks are basically locks that you just leave your hair and allow it to lock up on its own. Like you do not twist or braid or part your hair or anything. You just leave your hair. Most times people like freeform locks, you're basically starting your locks from an afro, so you just stop combing your hair and let it be. All you do is wash your hair and wash and things like that, but you don't do anything to decide the size of locks that you're going to end up with. Now the size of freeform locks varies. Like you can have really small locks from freeform locks, and you can also have like really big Congo locks. It all has to do with the properties of your hair and the length of hair you're starting with. So for people who start their locks with bald head, like who start their freeform locks from like no hair at all, people like that tend to have more like uniform locks that are kind of like smaller, as opposed to people who start their freeform locks from an afro, that kind of thing. So you can have, I'm going to leave some pictures on the screen just to give you guys an idea of what freeform locks look like, but you cannot really tell whether someone's locks are freeform or not just by looking at them, because like freeform locks can take literally any shape. You can have some people with locks that are really pretty uniform and like even in size and like really small, and they can actually be freeform lockers, so you can't really tell from the look of locks. Now next set of locks we're going to be talking about is what we all know, and that's what we call the traditional locks. Traditional locks are basically most of the locks you see around are traditional locks. Those are locks that are basically cylindrical and like are uniform in shape all around. Those locks are the ones that are started by dividing your hair into sections. You allow the locks to form after you have put your hair in twist, braids or whatever, or comb coils or things like that. Now traditional locks can vary in size, like anything from about 70 locks to about 200 locks. I would say traditional locks, traditional sized locks. So traditional sized locks can be like, when looking at the locks, each lock can be the size of like a pencil or as big as like 2 fingers, depending on how big your fingers are. But traditional size locks are basically the size of locks that most people end up with. So you have anything from 70 to about 200 locks. Now the thickness of the lock, like the diameter of the lock, actually varies from person to person. So you can have someone with 70 locks that each lock is about like this size, and you can have another person with the same number, 70 locks, and each lock can be like really small and skinny. So we are going to get into that in more detail later on in this video, but basically traditional locks are locks that are of a decent size. You can easily see that they are locks even if you are seeing from a distance, but they are not so big or chunky. So the next size of locks we're going to be talking about are thick locks. Thick locks are still traditional locks, but they are more on the thicker side. Most people don't have like thick locks are not as common as traditional size locks. But thick locks are basically locks that are anything from about 15 locks to about 69 locks. Now like I said, this is my own classification. Like this is not, I not copy this somewhere, so this is just my own personal classification, just for the purpose of explaining to you guys. So in case it's not what everyone knows, just take it that this is just my own classification. So anything from about 15 to 69 locks, I feel are thick locks. You know, like I said, the thickness of each lock highly depends on the density of the person that is wearing the locks. The next set of locks we're going to be talking about are wicks, what we call wicks. I feel like wicks are more like modern. You know, they are kind of like a recent style of wearing locks. Those locks are basically really big and really chunky. You have them like really spiky and standing. Those are basically locks that are less than 15. So you can have as little as like 2 locks or 3 locks, you know, and you can have up to 15. Wicks are usually really big and chunky. Wicks are handmade locks. They're not like freeform locks. Like you can have freeform lockers have locks that are as big as wicks, but they're not usually as, the shape is not usually as uniform as handmade wicks. So wicks are usually big chunky locks that they are usually handmade. You know, if you leave your hair, it's not just going to form into a wig. Most people form their wigs from an afro, or they form their wigs from regular small size locks. After a while they decide that, okay, I want my locks to be really big and chunky, so you go ahead and combine the locks to form wigs. But basically locks that are less than 15 are considered to be wigs. The next size of locks I'm going to be talking about are micro locks. Micro locks are really small and skinny. You can have anything from 200 up to about 600 locks. You can even have up to 600 locks that are micro locks. Those are very skinny. Those are like one of the smallest sizes of locks that you're going to find. Another size of locks that we are going to be talking about, and this is going to be the last one I'm going to be talking about, is sister locks. Sister locks are even smaller than micro locks. Like sister locks are very small. You can have anything from 600 and above size of locks. Now you can, the thing about, I feel like people usually use the term micro locks and sister locks interchangeably, but according to my research, the only difference I see is that you can have sister locks that are about the size of micro locks, just that sister locks are locks that are done by, you know, professional sister lock consultant. They have a technique that they use for making the locks. Meanwhile, micro locks are locks that are still really small, but they are done by like regular 2-strand twists and or interlocking. I feel like people that do micro locks are mostly people who like the look of sister locks, but they are not willing to invest the amount of money required to make and maintain sister locks, so they go for micro locks. So you just do really tiny mini twists just to mimic the look of sister locks. So those are all the lock sizes that we have. The next thing you want to pay attention to, you need to consider before you decide what size of locks you want to get, is try to figure out what size of locks you are more drawn to. By that I mean, what size of locks, like, is, I know that all locks are beautiful. Like for me, when I wanted to decide the size of locks I wanted, like I was always so confused. I see someone in micro locks, I'm like, oh, this is so cute, should I get micro locks? And then next day or like next minute I see someone else with like bigger traditional size locks. I'm like, oh, this is so cute, like I think I want this, you know, that kind of thing. But if you look at like all these different lock sizes, you're going to find the one that you are more drawn to. Even though I love small size locks, I love micro locks and everything, but I'm more like drawn to bigger size locks, and that's why at the end of the day I decided to go for something bigger than micro or sister locks, because even though they look cute, it's not like, that's not really my style, you know. So you want to actually pay attention to the size of locks that is the most enticing to you. How do you do that? I feel like you should go online. You can Google it, or you can go ahead and check lock accounts on Instagram. You're going to see all sorts of locks, all sorts of sizes of locks, and just look at all of them and decide what size is more attractive to you, like what size you feel like you like the most. So if you figure that out, the next thing you want to pay attention to is you need to consider the density of your hair. Now the density of your hair will greatly affect how your locks will turn out at the end of the day, because like it's all about the density of your hair. So for someone who, if you have thicker hair, by thicker hair I mean like hair that is really dense, how are you going to know the density of your hair? Most people say that just look at your hair. Like if you're starting from an afro, just look at your hair like combed out without parting your hair. Just look at your hair all together. If you can see your scalp, then you have low density hair. Then if you cannot see your scalp, you have high density hair or things like that. But I don't find that to be that accurate, because sometimes you can have damaged hair, and that can make your hair appear to be thick, more scanty. But when you start out your locks, after a while, because by the time the damage fades away, your hair is going to get way thicker. So I would say just kind of like inspect your scalp, how thick your hair is at the roots of your hair. I feel like that will give you a better idea of the thickness of your hair, like the density of your hair. So just inspect the roots of your hair and see, like, just take like a portion of your hair or different portions of your hair randomly, and just kind of like inspect how the roots of your hair is. If it's really thick, if you have like kinky coily hair, if it's really thick and difficult for you to like put your hands in, then that will give you an idea of how thick your hair is. Now, the thickness of your hair, like I keep saying thickness, but when I say thickness, just understand that I'm referring to the density of your hair. So density of your hair will greatly affect how thick your locks will end up being. So for someone with really high density hair, 70 locks may be so thick, like very thick, and someone with density that is not so high, 70 locks may not look as thick. So the thickness of your hair will determine how thick the individual lock will be. Now, another thing that for you to decide the size of locks you're going to get, you have to bear in mind that your locks are going to be about the size of your sections. So how thick is your section? If your section is like this wide, just know that your locks are going to be more or less this wide. But how thick your like how high your density is will actually affect like the thickness. So it's not just about the scalp. For people usually advise that if you have if your density is not so high and you want the full look, people usually advise that you go for smaller locks, because with thicker locks you're going to have a lot of scalp showing. The thicker the locks, the more scalp is going to be showing. So for me, for example, now I have so many locks. I started with about 186 locks, but I've combined a few, like some locks have combined, so I believe I still have up to probably 170 or more, you know. So I have so many locks, but as you guys can see, no matter where I turn, you can hardly see my scalp. If I were to take my lock, if my locks were much bigger, let's say I had lock that were like this big is one lock, this big is another lock, you will discover that I'm going to be able to see my scalp a lot more. So bearing in mind that the thicker your lock, the bigger your lock, the bigger the sections of your locks, the more scalp that you're going to see when your locks form, the more scalpy your hair is going to be. So you have to bear that in mind. And if you're someone that naturally has low density hair, going for really thick locks, like really wide sections of locks, will mean that your scalp will even be more obvious. So you're not going to be getting the volume. Let's look at this, for example. Let's say each person, let's say we have 3 different people, right, with different densities, and they are all trying to achieve this thickness of lock. So thickness of your hair will greatly affect the number of locks that you're going to end up with. So let's say you're trying to get this size. If your hair is not as thick, your hair may be able to make just probably 5 of this, as opposed to someone who has thicker hair, whose hair may actually be able to make like probably 7 of this, you know. So at the end of the day, you're going to have more scalp showing. Your hair is going to look way more scanty than someone else who has like more density than you. So you want to bear that in mind, and that's why most people advise that if you have hair that is not as dense, you should go for smaller size locks, because those small size locks kind of like give the illusion of thickness. So if you leave your hair down, it's going to look really full and thick. It's going to give the illusion that your hair is actually fuller and thicker than how it actually is. So you actually want to bear that in mind when deciding the size of locks you want to go for. Another thing you want to bear in mind when deciding the size of locks you want to get is the maintenance of each size of locks. Now, like I said earlier, the more dense your hair is, the less scalp you're going to see, no matter the size of locks that you go for. So that's why people usually say that people with thicker hair are more likely to pull off thicker locks, because their hair is already dense, you know. So when they add the thick locks, you're still going to have a decent amount of density, such that their resulting hair overall will not look that scalpy. That same principle applies for plenty locks. Like if someone with thick hair goes for really small locks, that person is going to have so many locks on their head. That will mean more time that it will take to maintain their locks. So the thicker your hair, the more time it's going to require for you to maintain whatever size of locks you get. And if you go for really small locks, it's going to take forever to maintain that size of locks. Another thing you want to bear in mind is that because small size locks tend to have less space in between and tend to be less scalpy, right? So the smaller the size of your locks, the more you're going to have to maintain your locks. Like people with really small locks cannot really freeform their hair, except they want their locks to merge, you know. So if you're someone that you don't like to have a routine for your hair, you don't want to have, okay, every 6 weeks I retwist or I interlock, or every 7 weeks or every 12 weeks or things like that, then going for really small size locks may not actually be the best for you, because you're going to have because your locks are so small and so tightly spaced together. At the end of the day, you're going to have merging. Merging is going to be like, your hair is going to be matting a lot at the roots. So you need to be on a routine to make sure that you're always maintaining your hair, to make sure that your hair remains separated, as opposed to someone who has thicker locks. If your locks are thick, you're going to have way less marrying and merging. So I'm going to use my hair and my mom's hair for example. My mom has 23 locks, so her locks are pretty thick. My mom goes like months in between retwist or like in between maintenance, you know. Me on the other hand, if I go like 2 weeks, my hair is already starting to marry and merge at the root. Unlike my mom, her locks still merge at the root, but it's not usually as bad as my own hair because I have so many locks, and that will mean that my hair is going to be doing this and like coming together a lot more than someone who has bigger locks. So you actually want to bear that in mind, how long it will take for you to maintain your locks. Apart from the fact that with smaller locks, you have more locks to maintain. If you're going to be retwisting, you're going to be retwisting more locks. The fact that your locks are even small will also mean that you're going to be having a lot of margin and merging more than someone who has bigger locks. So the time required to maintain your hair is going to be way more. How frequent you maintain your hair will actually be way more than someone who has bigger locks can get away with not maintaining their hair for months. Someone with bigger locks can get away with semi-freeforming and like going up to a year without actually retwisting their hair, and they can easily come back 1 year later and be able to easily separate their locks. Someone with really small locks like Sisterlocks or micro locks, you can't really go that long, up to like months, without going for your retightening or like your retwisting, because your locks are so tightly spaced that any little time that passes by, your locks will start to merge at the roots. Another thing you want to bear in mind when deciding the size of locks to go for is your lifestyle. Are you very active? Do you like to wash your hair often? Do you like to like really be active and like be all over the place with your hair? If that is you, then going for a really small size locks may not actually be the best option for you, because like I said, the smaller your locks, the more time you're going to have to spend maintaining your hair. Now, the more often you wash your hair, the more often you wet your hair and things like that, the more matting and merging you're going to experience at the roots. So with if you have really small locks, it may actually be frustrating for you, always having to spend a lot of time trying to separate, especially when you're just starting out, you know. So if you are going to be really active, if you are going to be sweating a lot, if you are going to be washing your hair a lot, going for something that is more on the bigger side will actually be better than going for something that is really tiny like Sisterlocks or micro locks. So you may want to go for traditional size locks. Even if you want really small locks, going for something like about 100 or like less than 100 locks may actually be the best option for you. The next thing you want to pay attention to when deciding the kind of locks you want to go for, and I've mentioned this briefly before, is whether or not you want to freeform your hair. If you're going to be doing any form of freeforming, whether you're going to be semi-freeforming or whatever, you cannot really do that if you have really small locks, because like I said, your locks are going to be trying to merge and marry a lot, you know. So you can't really go too long without maintaining your locks, and freeforming may not be for you. People with I've never heard of someone with Sisterlocks freeforming because if you freeform, that would mean that you no longer want to have Sisterlocks. You want your locks to progress into bigger size locks, because if you want to continue to maintain that tiny size of locks, you need to be consistent with your routine of always retwisting, interlocking, basically separating your locks at the roots, else it's going to merge. So if you're someone that you have the intention of freeforming at any point in time in your lock journey, then I highly recommend that you probably go for something that is more on the bigger side than smaller side, because that will give you more peace of mind. Another thing you want to bear in mind is your personality. personality. So if you're someone that you like to style your hair a lot, you always want to have a new style every now and then you want to go for locks that are more on the smaller side. Chunky locks that are more like Wicks, lock wigs, and like really thick traditional locks. But I'm talking about locks that are more like on the thick side, about up to 20, like 30 locks. You have limited styling options. Generally the smaller your locks, the more styling options you're going to have. So if you're someone that you always want to be doing a new style every now and then you want to go for something that is more on the smaller side, because that will give you more options to style your hair, as opposed to doing something that is really big and chunky. Another thing you want to bear in mind is how you're willing to withstand pressure from the outside world. So generally speaking, bigger locks tend to take longer before they fall. So if you're starting your locks and they are really chunky, you're going to have them sticking out and spiking out in random places way longer than someone with smaller locks. So me, for example, now I have, like I said, I have so many locks. So generally my hair naturally falls like this to frame my face. If I were to have way bigger locks, like if I were to have all this now was like one lock, and probably all this one lock, it will probably not be able to fall like this. It will probably stand. It will not like frame my face the way my locks are framing my face now. Over time it will fall eventually. But if you are going to be concerned about that, if you don't want your hair to be all over the place for too long, then you actually want to bear that in mind, because the thicker your locks, the longer it will take for it to fall and like kind of like frame your face, if there is anything like that, you know. So you really want to bear that in mind when deciding the size of locks you go for. Another thing you want to bear in mind is how often, like how long you want to wear your locks for, like you want to have your locks for. And you also want to pay attention to the weight. Generally, bigger locks tend to end up being heavier than smaller size locks. So if you intend to have your locks for a very long time, you want to bear in mind that if you go for bigger size locks, your locks will get a lot heavier. Like even with smaller size locks, your locks will actually get heavier, but bigger locks tend to be heavier than smaller locks. So you want to make sure that you know this, so that when the time comes, it is something that you're prepared for. Then another thing you want to bear in mind is as related to how long you want to have your locks for, is that the smaller your locks, the higher your chances of having lock breakage and like things like that, damage basically. So you want to bear that in mind. If you have small size locks, you want to, despite the fact that you have a lot of styling options, you don't want to overdo it, because small size locks have a higher chance of damage than big size locks, because generally it's easier to break two broomsticks together than to break a full bunch of broomsticks, you know. So that's basically the same principle with locks. So the bigger your locks, the more resilient and like tougher it's going to be. So the more it's going to be able to withstand a lot, as opposed to smaller size locks. So if you go for that, if you're going to be really rough and like really you're not just careful and paying attention, then going for really small locks may not be for you, because number one, more maintenance, more time to maintain your hair, your chances of breaking will be more. You are going to, having small size locks, you are going to basically almost be like a loose natural. So most of the things, like small size locks, are not as freeing. That's why the fact that you have more styling options, they are not as freeing as bigger size locks, because you still need to be very careful, else the small size locks, you may start to break, you may start to experience thinning at the roots, or like different things, like you may start to experience alopecia from frequent retightening and things like that, basically, because you have to maintain your hair often. So you want to bear all those things in mind when going for the size of locks that you want to, you know, go for. What men people usually say is that if you have a size of locks that you want to go for in mind, make your locks smaller just to play around with it. Then if you decide that you want your locks to be bigger, you can easily combine. I don't recommend that. I kind of had that idea when I first started my locks, but I got to know that combining two locks into one after they have formed will actually not give you as thick results as if you started with thicker locks in the first place. So I don't recommend you combining locks. I feel that do your research, do everything you need to do before you get your locks, and once you get the size of locks, just maintain the size. If your locks combine on their own, that's totally fine, but I don't recommend you manually going to combine your locks, because number one, you can cause damage within the core of your locks. Number two, the resulting lock will not be as thick as if you had started with like that size of locks in the first place. So I don't recommend combining your locks. Like, to summarize everything I've said, what you need to bear in mind before you decide the size of locks you want to do is, the thicker your locks, the less maintenance you are going to have to do. The thicker your locks, the more freeing it's going to be. The thicker your locks, the longer you can go without doing anything to your hair. The thicker your locks, the stronger your locks will be. But also, the thicker your locks, the more scalpy your resulting hair is going to be. The thicker your locks, the more like scanty looking your hair is going to be. The thicker your locks, the less styling options you're going to have. The thinner your locks, the more styling options you're going to have. The thinner your locks, the more you can mimic natural hairstyles, you know. The thinner your locks, the more neat looking is going to be. Like, people have this perception of what neatness is. The thinner your locks, the more you can mimic that look. Generally, fine locks like Sisterlocks and micro locks tend to be like more acceptable to many people that do not understand locks than thicker locks. So you're going to have less hate from the world. You're going to have less negative things. People are going to have less negative things to say about your hair if you have thinner locks as opposed to thicker locks. But also, the thinner your locks, the more often you're going to have to maintain your hair. The thinner your locks, the higher your chances of experiencing things like breakage and like popping of locks. By popping of locks, I mean like when your locks just like uproot for no reason, or like probably for bad reasons or whatever. The thinner your locks, generally, the more time you're going to have to invest in your hair. The thinner your locks, the less liberating your hair care is going to be, because you're going to be doing so many things that people with loose natural hair do, because your hair is almost like loose natural hair. But also, the thicker your locks, the heavier your locks are going to be as your locks get longer, and the heavier your locks are going to be when your locks are wet. Also, the thinner your locks, the easier it's going to be for you to remove build-up from your locks, you know, because your locks are really small. It's easy to access. But the thicker your locks, the more difficult it's going to be for you to let go or like get rid of build-up. So you want to bear all these things in mind, and that will help you decide something that will actually end up being better for you. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if this is your first time on my channel and you'd like to see more videos from me, then definitely subscribe, and make sure you click the notification bell so that every time I upload a new video you get a notification. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys in my next video.